been organized by UF in our program to improve the quality of learning in distance learning. I would like to represent Mr. Jean-Marc Alves, the Director of Asia Pacific of region of AUF. We also have the honor to welcome the Professor Pascal Paquet from University of Strasbourg in France, who is the main presenter today. Now, I will give the phone, the voice to the Director of Asia Pacific in the UF, Mr. Jean-Marc Lopez. Thank you, Mr. Dai. Hello, everyone.
Recording in
For
progress.
all of your participants today in all of the Asia Pacific region. And I will also to say my greetings to Pascal Marque, who is the main presenter today. I would like to thank all of you because today it is not our first time, it's our third webinar this year. But when I see the audience and I will see the diversity of the audiences, it makes me think that this topic is a big topic, a very important topic, and it's a new tool for us that allows us to uh, use the expertise of all of us to access and to help each other. And as Mr. Dai has said, a lot of countries, almost 9 countries, are listening in 12 or 13 different channels. So 2 or 3 channels. So I think that the topic today, the production of the digital resources uh, that Pascal is going to present, he's going to share a lot of information on this topic. It's a lot of strategic insights. Uh, and in this topic, and he spent a lot of time, and I think all of you too, in your universities to use digital resources in your university work. And so these are the questions that are very, very important. That it's important that all of the universities are prepared to organize to use these terms in terms of training their staff to hire and to activate their personnel. And anyways, for AUF, in representing my team, I would like to congratulate and thank Mr. Dai for all his work. And in the ninth university in the Asia Pacific region, we have a strong team. And we have a lot of support from everyone, from in terms of budget and etc. And I hope that you have a lot of exchanges, good exchanges today, and do not hesitate to ask questions and to make today's presentation come alive. And again, thank you to all the participants, the representatives, and all of the audiences that come today. And I hope that you have a good session. Thank you, Mr. Director. And today, now, we are going to listen to the presentation by Professor Pascal Macri. Thank you, Mr. Director, for your introduction. You're welcome. I would also like to introduce myself a little bit before I share my screen and talk about my presentation. I would like to talk slowly so that the translators would have the time to think and to give the most important elements of what I'm going to say. So it's the morning here in Europe. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd like to show you a photo of the region Alsace where I live for the last 26 years. I have really nice photos and backgrounds of Southeast Asia that where I haven't been for a long time. So I'd like to again thank Dai for inviting me. Of course, it's in a work relationship, but I have known him for 13 years, and we have worked together in a lot of projects by AUF. I'm very happy and very honored for me to be able to work in my native language, and in this great environment of AUF. It's remarkable, and it was nice to see the evolution or the diversity of the speakers and the representatives in this organization. All of us are French speaking, and our friends in the African and the Asian continent, I would say that now represent the most important part of the French speaking. And so, again, thanks for your assistance, your interest, and I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to start today's discussion. So you have seen the titles in the documents that have been shared. This is not a surprise. So it's going to be a representation of about 45 minutes or 1 hour. It's a very classical presentation. We'll have some introduction, and it's going to finish with a conclusion. We have a lot of topics in the middle, and I'm going to show you that even though the pandemic has changed our lives a lot and has considerably changed the way that we're teaching and learning, and the digital tools that we are using have a really long history in the training and educational history. Has a lot of case studies already. And next, I'm going to talk about the small theory that allows us to think about things in a very particular way. And this way of thinking is going to lead us to the institutional policy of resource production. Next, we will talk about this interesting topic about distance learning, hybrid learning, and I'll finish with a few conclusive words. And I hope that we'll have a lot of time sometime in the end to have some exchanges. So if there's some technical problems, I have some faces here on my screen, so I hope that we won't have any difficulties. So first, we talk about the northern countries versus the southern countries, and in the way that they use digital resources. And I think the majority of the participants of today's session are from the southern countries. So we see that you are more focused on training the teachers and to respond to the educational needs of your populations. What it means is that you must train the populations, train the teachers. This is not a very old need. And we are in the tradition of history of technologies. In French, we call them new technologies, but they are not so new. They are older than me. and I cannot hide you that I have more than 50 years of age in my life. And I would like to present to you here that the introduction of technology has started in around 1960 with what we call EAO, which is CAT in English, Computer Assisted Teaching. And as we move on a few decades, we have these other terms. They sound a little bit barbaric. Uh, so I'm going to share about them in a few seconds, but which I want to point out here that these kind of technologies are not new. They transform themselves as time goes along. We talk about information technology, microcomputers, multimedia, internet, e-learning, and the theories, the scientific theories also evolved along the way. We have a change of names that talks about the various parts of the human cognition. Next. So we are in a topic that's quite old. So I'd like to try to cover this triplet of topics to show you that today we keep the same use and we increase the way that we use these tools. And as you can see, that anything that's scientific, we can discuss and we can debate about them. To come back to the 20th century, we have a series of theories: behavioralism, constructivism, and cognitivism. And they succeed one another, and they have been put forward to justify the realization of applications that corresponds to the possibility that technology has given us. So we're going to have AEAO, which is the Computer Assisted Teaching, CAT. Since the end of the Second World War. After that, in the second half of the 20th century, we have what we call EIAO, which is Interactive Computer Learning Environments. And we have the birth of hyperdocuments and microworlds, where we can click on some assets on the computer. And next, we have, towards the end of the 20th century, we have EIAH, which is virtual learning environment. And this shows the domination of one type theory. We could say it, we could call it cognitive or psychological theory. So we have behavioralist theory, constructivist theory, and cognitivist theories. They are inspired by the North American works on the studies of the human memory. And in the 21st century, the scientific theories continue to evolve, and in the same way that technology evolves, and we have the possibility to have distance learning, first by postal or by telephone and fax, and from the end of the 1990s, Uh, and in towards 2000, we have the ability to manage learning. So we have the theory of activity. And more recently, we have the MOOC, massive online open courses. And even closer to us, we have ENA, which is stands for Digital Learning Environment, DLE in English. So not going to go into the details of each of these theories, but the idea that I have developed is that as time passes by, in the last 70 or almost 80 years, the scientific theories on the human learning has changed, has evolved, and the technology also evolved and has offered us more and more possibilities. And today we have the possibility to uh, almost have direct control of the system of exploitation with the digital learning. What it means is that we have individual organizations that allow us to connect to our institutions and to learn in a formal or informal way. If now we talk about the tradition of case studies, of usage studies, uh, we are we see that there's disruption, there's a breaking between the 20th and the 21st century. This is a kind of Western view of the reality. I think it is quite different in the regions where you live. But anyways, this is how things have evolved since technology has been introduced in the educational domain until today. And now you have the same kind of challenges and the main difficulties. The first way to study the uses is to show the added value of education of technology. The person who the supporters of the educational technology have always promised that it's going to be a lot better with computers, and they have tried to prove that computers will support education. Of course, we cannot prove that it's going to be worse with computers. And at the middle of the 1990s, the internet appears have the possibility to dematerialize, which means to go without the content. We have the possibility to desynchronize the learning environments, learning situations. Uh, we no longer have the need to prove the value added by the technology, but now we're showing a superiority of one media to the other, that the new technological media is better than the traditional media, radio or television, which at this time has already been used a lot. And it's used to transmit information. In this approach that I call technical and then meditative, the words are not so important, but I just want to show you that the first view is more focused on the technology, the second view is more on the media. The learning situations are getting more and more efficient. And in the beginning of the 21st century, we have the concept of use case. is very much related to institutional strategy. Now, we we no longer need to prove the superiority of technology. We we no longer have the perspective to wanting to show the superiority of technology use compared to the classical situations. And now we are more focused on, in the scientific communities, we are more interested in how the persons are required to use the digital content, or who wants to use digital content. It could be chosen or could be obliged. How the users, but also the teachers and the deciders, how can they take ownership of these technologies? And in the last 20 years, this has been going on. So I'm going to skip this slide because I just talked about it right now. So what do we have as conceptual tools to give ourselves the most clear image of the realities of these uses? And as far as teachers and universities and key decision makers are concerned, how must we orient ourselves to take important decisions? So there's a theory that we call the theory of activity. It's at the end of the 20th century. It's very much used, which says that the activity is of the subject is constrained by the tools that he used and also constrained by the objects that he transforms. And these activities are governed by the rules applied in communities, and it leads to a division of work. So we have an approach here that allows you to look at different parts of this triangle, and you can focus on one or the other points. Inside this theory of activities, we have a famous author, Pierre Abatel. He's a French psychologist. And he proposed a very powerful view. It says that when you take ownership of an object, and I want to remind you that since the end of the 20th century, our view has changed. We no longer need to show that it's better. We need to show that how does it work? How can we take advantage of technological tools? So Habadel said, he said that he's gonna mention these words that you might have read in English or French in your native language. He says that all of the cultural objects are artifacts or tools, and we need to take ownership of them to make them instruments. Any object of daily use will be a part of our culture if we don't use it. And we could be the tools that we use for eating, for cooking, to the objects that are more elaborated, like our knowledge, or the ones allow us to live in this 21st century world. And the transformations of these neutral objects that we don't really use until transform them into the objects that we must use, or otherwise known the instruments. So how does it work? It works in a sense that we need to transform, we need to, give these objects uses. The sandals that you wear in summer that allows you to, not burn yourself in the sand. We call it tong, sandal, right? French. So if you see these objects when you don't know how to use them, the first is usually gonna think of is take it and hit an insect to kill some sort of bug. So you see that an object requires a function. Is it for walking? Is it for defending ourselves against insects? It's got to be one or the other. And now, of course, you already know how it works, this kind of sandal. So this is an example I want to give you. So if we continue this kind of thinking and we apply it to education, that the learning and teaching environments requires the students and the pupils and the worker that are working, and they must take ownership of two objects. The first object is the content. The first is the content. It could be the pure knowledge. It's the object of the learning tool, right? And there's another object he must master. It's the scenario dimensions. That means I'm going to show you how it works with this multiplication table. Of course, you know all this from elementary school. When you learn to multiply, we represent the multiplication in different ways. And you see that if when we access our knowledge of multiplication, it requires us to understand this multiplication table. Why do I say that? Because in the traditional education world, in the end of the 19th century, about 150 years ago, it was, as a matter of fact, that the content, the disciplinary content, the objects that we need to learn were constrained by the printing industry, which was the dominating diffusion industry. So what I want to tell you before we move to the digital is that we lived in a world for more than a century where anything that we needed to learn or that we have learned must have been represented on two dimensions. Maybe it was not intentional, but it was a construct. So we had to represent our knowledge in the educational field. We must have written it on a table, on a blackboard or whiteboard, and we must then copy it to some notebook. What it means is that the way that we learn, the class, the learning environments, and the way that we took notes, was constrained by the principle, was constrained by this choice of diffusion technology.
Représenté et diffusé.
And this content must be able to be represented to them. And so that's where we are. And we want to say that 100 30, 150 years later, we have a planetary tradition of education. We have a cultural education. And everywhere in the world, we're dominated by the printing industry. So what happens when we introduce the digital aspect? And here I be back again. The concepts by Rabaro. So here we have a third artifact, a third tool. First, we have the knowledge to learn, is the didactic artifact. The representations of this knowledge is called a pedagogic artifact, which is also a way of us to access. And the third way to think about it is the technical artifact, the technology or the tool that we use to access. So it could have been, a chosen path or a obliged path. Like, for example, due to COVID-19, we must resort to these kind of technological uses. So we need to talk about ownership. So we must take ownership of these three tools at the same time. The educational content, the way that it's represented to the screen, and the technology. So the introduction of all of these digital tools adds, in a way, a third ownership, a third way to appropriate, to own these tools, these functions of the technological platforms that we're using to manipulate the objects that we must learn, that we must master, so that they become instruments of learning. So I have mentioned in the first half of my presentation that we have passed from a learning environment constraint. Well, it didn't feel so much like a constraint. It was dominated by the printing industry, and now we've passed on to a learning environment that today is no longer constrained and dominated by the printing industry. And in the last 12 months, we can say it's dominated by the industry of information technology. So what is the consequence of that? We can think about what kind of strategies we can build vis-a-vis this situation. And we'd like to show you how and with what kind of technological background, how we can view these concepts. So there are some realities that are quite simple. In our university education, or in the various global economies, some of them are growing, some of them are rich, different speeds. And once we are the key deciding actor, and we must spend the least possible to do the most possible with what we have. So the reduction of costs, with sometimes more work, is a huge preoccupation. And the idea on which all of us we have based, is to digitalize everything.
avec des moyens numériques,
And how can we use this technological means?
une fausse bonne idée.
It's kind of like a bad, bad idea. Why do I say that? If I come back here,
Dans l'industrie de l'imprimerie,
in the printing industry, we have an association between a didactic artifact and the pedagogic artifact. It was not a world that was dominated by the information technology industry. And now, in this world, we start to have instrument conflicts. What does that mean? It means that we have the knowledge, the representation of the knowledge, and the platform on which we will learn those knowledge, and those three would have to have some sort of conflict. So I think this kind of view is detailed by scientific theories. When you go on a platform, you don't say that, oh, it's a instrumental conflict. No, it's the way that the scientific community is thinking about that. I will give you two examples. When you watch a podcast, it's like a class that was recorded. You're not really in a class. Of course, there's a lot of advantages. You can take a conference call. You can take it anytime. You can take it today, tomorrow.
Qui sont donnés par exemple au Collège de France, sont disponibles.
The information that was given by a French colleague can be transmitted on iTunes or something like that. The first advantage is that you can give the access to this content to a large number of population. And you can pause the podcast. You can look at it more carefully. But you cannot ask questions to the presenter. We cannot interact with our neighbors. So we're looking at a course, looking at a conference, but it's not a course in presence, on site. Of course, we are tempted to do it in a systematic way. Another example that I'd like to give you is when you have a task on a collaborating platform, when you're communicating with your peers, your colleagues, your friends, but it's not really a classic group work because the digital use requires you to communicate in a asynchronous way. So it's not synchronized. So we can talk to each other, but we don't need to be next to each other. So you may have some questions on the topics discussed here. So the first consequence of these differences between the classical education and the introduction of digital tools is we need to reconsider the content so that the content are compatible with the way that we represent them, and that the representation way must be compatible with what the platform of learning allows us to do, otherwise known as the learning systems that the institutions have put in place. So, similar to what I was saying, was that the very, very simple principle in an intellectual way, of course, it's not the most simple practical principle, is that we must define precisely what the content is, and we must think about how to represent it, and the students will do what kind of acts each time that we pass from a classic education to a digital education.
Je dis cela parce que
I say that because if we don't do it, we will cause what I have shown you. We will cause instrumental conflicts, which is the impossibility of the students to learn simultaneously the content they must learn and the way to use the platform. So the best way to avoid the conflict is to do with the digital the things that were not possible without. It sounds very trivial, but it has very, very important consequences. What I mean to say is that if we want to avoid all of the problems, we have to do something with the digital, but we must do something else different from the things that we used to do without the digital. That means we must teach in a new way. We must teach new content. Of course, I would say it further, we must reconstruct the teaching materials, the curricula, the other activities, and other knowledge checks. What I want to say here is that if you can already do without digital, then don't need to do with digital. If we introduce digital, we must use digital to do something that was not possible before. So I give you another example. We take the airplane, right? We use the airplane to go the distance that we could not have gone in the past by cars. So digital is the same thing. It's not efficient to use digital to do something that we could do without. Anyways, the reality is different. Today, with digital, and in the conditions that we have lived in the last 12 months, our first reaction is to do the same thing with digital that we used to without digital. Which means we took very bad habits. Our first reflection is to digitalize the content, to do virtual classes, and to pass the knowledge or to build competencies with representations of these knowledges that were made for the print, not made for the digital tool. So in the last part of the slide, there are a lot of methods. They are well known and that allow us of a knowledge engineer can do distance teaching in a way that is quite in a quite efficient way. But it also causes a difficulty that is related to the instrumental conflict I mentioned before. So what I want to say is in this slide, and it will give you some perspectives for the decades that have passed in the history of information technology. I'd like to show you that we are passing from printing to digital technologies. We are transiting from the representation on paper to a representation where the instructor is writing on a tablet or online, and from an auditorium with classes, with students who take notes, to a new environment. And this old environment was, of course, very, very efficient in the 20th century, and now we have a new environment. I don't think it has been exploited sufficiently, this new environment. Why? Because the digital is in the middle of this slide, is that we must propose new content that can be represented in 3D. It must be simulated, must be augmented, and virtualized.
Quelques exemples.
I will give you some examples.
Si l'on sait déjà dématérialiser les ressources,
You know
c'est-à-dire
that we can dematerialize teaching resources. That means convert them into files and do distance learning. And we already know how to do remote teaching or to have virtual classes, like the webinar that we are having today, this morning in Europe, and this afternoon in your regions. And I'd like to say that if we can do that, it's thanks to the digital technology.
de critiquer.
And it's not good to criticize or to deny the advantages of technology that allows us to do what we can do today easily and efficiently. Of course, there's a carbon impact for the transportation by train and by automobiles. Of course, it works well, but it was limited. But if we want to go over the limit, we want to go further, we must represent the shows in 3 dimensions. You see, over here you have molecules that we represent in 3D. A photo that I took with the computer, and we can turn this molecule around to see its volume, which was, of course, not possible when we had 2D dimension. We can simulate. What does that mean? So we can imagine what happens over time if a system is an electric circuit here, right? How does it evolve over time? So we pass from 2D representation to a real presentation. We can click on this breaker, and it's going to cut or start the system. We learn about Ohm's law, right? we learn about circuits in parallel or circuits in series. We can augment, increase, augment the realities. Here you can see this person is walking around in the castle of Chambord, and through a tablet, he can go from the current reality to augmented reality. When this castle was built, and finally, we can figure out inaccessible objects, virtual reality. So here's a picture of Google Map of institute where I work. It's in Strasbourg, University of Strasbourg, and you can find this photo on Google Earth. It's an object that is, of course, inaccessible. So now we have a representation of it. So going back to the challenges, right? The challenges of production of digital resources. We must transit from using constrained content to new content that we have no idea how they can play out. And all of that is thanks to the digital tools and the industry of information technology. And this new way that we have not explored all of the pedagogical tools. We have new knowledge, new tools that we must master. And here I bring to your attention the points of discussion. There's some very strong points that I wanted to say this morning. If we must reproduce with digital tools what can be done without inevitably generating instrumental conflict, because we will add a technical system or a technical tool to access knowledge, and that was disseminated using the printing industry. So when we do that, when we try to do that, we will generate instrumental conflict. So today, if we need to talk about how the learners owning or taking ownership of the tools, it becomes more complicated when we pass from classical education to digital education. So that is a phenomena that I think merits more highlights from all of us. And as a consequence, we need to redefine in a rigorous way the content, also the representation, the scripting, and the possible actions vis-a-vis the educational content. So if we do that, we can access new unpublished content that is outside of the program. If we push this logic of engineering new digital resources, in the end, we will learn something that we could not have learned before. And how could we not learn before? Because of course we didn't have the tools required at the time. You know that without time, without money, we are just content to make available resource already. We just conduct virtual classes. But this will make the cognitive learning activity more difficult that I have just showed you. I don't say that it's impossible. And there are a lot of proofs to show that it's possible that you I cannot hear the presenter. Hello.
Excusez-moi, Pascal, vous avez perdu la parole. Vous réactivez votre micro.
Hello, I still cannot hear. 1, 2, 3.
Mon micro est activé, vous m'entendez?
Oui,
Okay,
oui, oui.
I can hear now. Okay.
Je pense qu'il y a eu un souci technique. Désolé.
Oh, sorry about that.
Mon écran.
I will share my screen again.
Alors, c'est la dernière partie
This
de
is the last part of the discussion and the conclusion.
je pense.
I think that you don't need to dramatize this kind of conclusions, but we are moving from a printing approach of education to a digital information approach. And what we have lived through with the COVID-19 pandemic is not normal, and all of us have tried our best. And I'm not trying to criticize what I cannot observe. And if we take a more normal course of evolution with the courses in universities, the students, of course, this is gonna take a lot more decades, just like how it took many decades. So that the leisure industry, the cinema industry, detach itself from the theater industry. And you see how in the beginning of the 21st century, the cinema has evolved. First, it was muted and black and white. And now we have a way to do cinema that is completely different from theater. And it's the way that we tell the story of cinema that is now completely different from theater. And now we see that now the cinema now goes back to inspired or influence the performing arts. You know Cirque du Soleil, right? A very famous. In this show, there's a lot of things that are borrowed from the cinematographic industry. Why do I say that? Because I think that we're living through the same history. These challenges are there. We must learn, we must teach with digital resources, and we're detaching ourselves from the education without digital content. That is like the theater. And it's one of the ways to do it is that we want to do something with digital that things cannot be done without digital. So there's a lot of scientific arguments that allows me to defend my idea. I'm also a teacher. I'm also responsible for training. I'm also deciding a key person in my institution. So it's a bit more complicated from my case. But we need to take two postures. We have to think about where we must go, and also think about practical point of view. What can we do today? With what means that we have. So now I can discuss with all of them today. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that the technical conditions were okay, acceptable, even though we had a small hiccup. And I'm happy to respond to your questions. And once again, I thank the IUF for the support.
Erreur typographique.
But maybe I have some sort of errors on the slides, but I hope for your understanding. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le
Thank
Professeur.
you very much, Professor Pascal Marquet, for your presentation.
Global de tout le parcours.
Very interesting topic, the evolution, the technological evolution.
Commencer les questions-réponses.
And so now we'd like to start the Q&A. So we
Participants.
would like to prioritize the participants who want to talk directly. You can raise your hand and we're going to call you.
Questions. Dans le
Others, you can type your question in the chat box. And we are going to put this question to the professor.
Les deux premières mains
We
levées.
have
Monsieur
two hand raising hands.
Mujola Kitenge, qui nous suit depuis.
It's from Africa.
Très actif de nos webinaires. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, professeur
Thank
Marquet.
you, Professor Marquet.
Je suis
Thank
très
you, everyone. I am very happy to join this rich meeting.
Parce que il y avait un
I'm
problème
sorry, I missed yesterday because there was a time gap.
à 14 heures alors que c'était déjà
I thought that it was at 2 p.m., but it was already at 9 a.m.
avec beaucoup de passion votre présentation.
I have followed with a lot of passion,
Riche.
and it was a very rich content, this for sure. On the other hand, I am in Democratic Congo.
C'est une grande ville. Il y a des
I'm
endroits
in a very big city where the technology,
inexistante.
which is almost quasiment not existing.
Même pas comment manipuler l'ordinateur.
Some people don't know how to use computers.
Des professeurs ordinaires.
Even in the universities, there's some professors
un problème.
don't know how to use technology. So it's a serious problem. And I hope that AUF, when you are in Congo,
Parce que c'est une
you
technologie
could help us.
en Europe, mais dans
Because
nos pays,
technology is developed in Europe, but in other countries, it is not so developed.
vous faites avec les webinaires, s'il y a des bourses, en tout cas multipliées pour que les enseignants.
Is there some kind of scholarships so that the teachers can gain from some sort of
On a encore un problème
gain some sort of support?
rattrapé. Voyez-vous, il y a encore une nouvelle technologie.
In countries like us, we have not caught up to the technology. So I hope that AUF, who is our partner, a French-speaking partner, can help us with some promotional programs. So that is my proposal.
Si je peux répondre à ça, peut-être juste.
I don't know if I can reply to that. I think it's the policy of AUF
du monde.
To support one region to the other.
De dire, c'est que
what I can say,
il ne s'agit pas de faire du numérique pour faire du numérique.
It is not you just do digital because you need to do digital.
Les technologies numériques doivent
Things that worked without digital must be continued.
Simplement, lorsqu'on introduit du numérique,
simply when you introduce the digital tools, the consequences that you will have is what I have shown you in the theoretical framework.
Perception individuelle de la
in order for us to get out of our individual perception of the reality, I have experienced this personally,
analyse les
I
phénomènes
say that if we analyze the phenomena
la théorie
through Rabelais' theories and
la
his
théorie des conflits instrumentaux,
extensions of the conflicts of instruments,
après la
and
réalité
we arrive at the decision we
dans
make.
différents territoires,
And in the different regions,
êtres humains très
you
inégaux,
you know that all of us
nous vivons sur la planète. Et
have very different access to technologies all around the world. So I think that AUF have a lot of projects have tried their best in the last 10, 20 years to solve this problem.
Merci la question, merci monsieur le professeur. Justement, concernant l'AEF, comme vous
Thank
habitez,
you very much. As you say, you live in Africa, you can contact the AUF representative in your area.
des opportunités pour participer.
So you can have a lot of ideas to
Monsieur Nguyễn Chí Thành de l'Université nationale
develop this. Mr. Nguyen Chi Thành from the National University of Hanoi. He will have some questions. Thank you, Mr. Pascal Baguet, professor. Some questions. Can you explain to us small information for me, because I'm an educator in my university, which is the Educational University, National University of Pedagogy in Hanoi. We also are a member of AUF, but it's true that in our university there are very few courses in French. So I have participated in today's presentation with a lot of interest, so that I take some sort of references for my French teaching in my Vietnamese university at the moment. And UF has given me this chance. I have 4 questions. First is, title of this presentation is to produce digital resources. You have talked about the technological tools in general. Can you talk about the tools for producing this digital content? How can you make ebooks? How can you digitalize a document from traditional form to a technological form? The second question is, you talk about the different artifacts. There are 3 artifacts: didactic artifact, pedagogic artifact, and technical artifact. How can you distinguish? How can we distinguish? Because I'm thinking from the pedagogic point of view, I can try to transform the tool into a technical artifact. So what is the role of the subject vis-a-vis the didactic artifact? So this is my question, just to elaborate a bit more on these 3 artifacts. And I would like to then continue to my third question. You talked about the instrumental conflict. How can the teacher produce digital resources? So how can you apply this to digital resource production? We talk about instrumentalization and instrumentation. So can you give me, how can you talk about professors in their quest to produce digital resources with instrumentation and instrumentalization?
Et la dernière,
And the last question I have is,
le conflit
can you talk more about the instrument conflict? I think it's very important that it's very important to all of us, and it's my first time to hear about it. And I think that you talk about the conflict between a student and a instructor. Of course, can you share a bit more about this instrumental conflict?
Merci pour ces questions très 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 importantes.
Thank you for your very important questions.
Je vais essayer de les traiter
I
peut-être.
would like to treat them not in the order that you have asked the question, but first is what are the digital tools that we can train teachers so that they can create resources for the digital world. I think I'm not going to build them, it already exists.
Alors, je vais vous donner un
First
scénario.
thing that we can do, we give you some example. For example, the teacher have we have some Word or Excel files,
Fichiers de type PowerPoint.
or PowerPoint files. The first thing that can do is to convert it to PDF files and to move it to the platform that are used by the institutions. We can give a bit more details. It depends on the platform that you're using. I don't want to talk. I don't want to mention too much about what platforms to use, what files to create. I think it depends on the author. What I would say is that when you look at this kind of uses and this kind of applications, with the theoretical framework, how should we look at it? I come back to your three other questions for this interesting synthesis you created. It seems that you have understood very well the content I have presented. When we are doing education in the digital world, we have three different objects: the knowledge or the skill, which I call the didactic artifact. It's not appropriated by the student or the instructor. It is not your instruments, it is artifacts of our human culture. This pure knowledge must be represented. It must have a photo. It's not, it cannot be a knowledge without a discussion about this knowledge, or it cannot be a representation of this knowledge. So once we have represented this knowledge, we must manipulate it through a digital platform or program. So I'll give you an example.
La division.
Division. Divide one number by the other.
Ça, on est tous adultes, hein, et on sait
we
tous.
We all adults here, and we all know what is division.
Division, vous
If
avez
I say division, you have a picture in your head, and it explains to you what is division. It is the opposite of multiplication.
Est-ce qu'on représente la division?
But how can we represent the division? In educational field world, like in France, I would be very surprised if it's different in other parts of the world. We teach the students we talk about sharing. We tell students, oh, dividing is sharing. So we tell a history. We have a birthday cake, and we must share with X or Y people. So we want to divide the cake And we're going to make the students understand that dividing is the same thing as sharing. So we divide a number that is 1, and we create something that is less than 1 in the end. And it's very complicated because when you say 2 cakes and 9 boys or nine children, so when we have to do that, it's very, very difficult.
L'artefact,
So that is what I call pedagogic artifact. If the students doesn't understand a piece of the cake, then they cannot understand what is division. So they must learn 2 things, two artifacts. First is division, which is a human knowledge, and secondly, they need to think about a birthday party where they, they invite their classmates to their own birthday party, and they stay in the house for 4 hours. They run around, they drink juices, they put the cake everywhere, and you have to clean everything up after they have left. So that is two artifacts different that you have to learn.
Enseignement à distance.
So the third aspect is the technical artifact. So how can you make them understand division? You may do something like this. You can show a movie with a mother of the family. Sorry for this kind of example. And this mother is sharing the cake with the children, and the children are all standing around, and then we can all ask questions about what is this mother doing, how the children are doing, and maybe one child is a little bit upset because the cake is not divided equally, blah blah blah. So you can see we have a scenario here, and that is a instrumental conflict, because the way that we represent this knowledge, it is conflicting with the digital platform. We are showing a video of a teacher, and we're inventing a story. We can even take a clip from a movie or from a cartoon, and we can explain why is it like that when we divide. So we are recreating the content, and this principle that
Introduction du numérique.
That I would like to apply to all digital transformations.
Et pour répondre à votre dernière question,
and to reply to your last question, instrumentation or instrumentalization.
Interaction avec un objet.
So you are in interaction with an unknown object, you start to giving it some functions, that is instrumentalization.
Et ensuite, une fois qu'on a attribué une fonction
and once you have given it a function, we are going to mobilize all of the knowledge already there to use it.
L'inverse de la multiplication.
If you don't understand that division is the opposite of multiplication, what it means that you didn't put in the function that is the opposite of the multiplication, you cannot mobilize the knowledge you have on multiplication on the concept of division. Sorry for this very, very technical explanation, but the consequence is that if we take the things that we have never taught, or the things that we could not have taught when we were in the industry age, then we have infinite possibilities.
Voilà pour cette première série de questions.
So that is my reply to your first series of questions. Thank you very much for question and for your responses.
Un élément de plus, c'est que
I would like to add some elements here. For the tools,
dans ce programme, a proposé un atelier de formation
we have a workshop on training, which is called F1, on the transformation of pedagogical resources on to digital content.
environ
So you have about 15 hours in 5 weeks
que vous avez
on how to transform the content that you have.
Par quelle méthode afin de
How do you treat the materials with what kind of methods so that they are adaptable for distance learning.
déjà
So we already have a list of
prochainement
content, and we will explain to you, we will communicate with you in the future on how to join this program.
jusqu'au
And
24 juin.
the program is open until the 24th of June. So you can subscribe and you can join this program. And it's going to be only in Vietnamese, and it's going to be
en français, animé
organized by me, by myself. There's another
et un petit cœur.
workshop by Mr. Abena, and it's going to be a little bit
Je
like
profite
a little bit similar to the same thing.
qui
So, would like to see another question from Ms. Phương Nguyễn.
les images de Google et des vidéos sur YouTube pour utiliser dans les cours.
Can we use photos from Google
Les droits de propriété.
and the YouTube videos to teach
Traité directement dans
and without violating any copyright tools?
programmé.
So to summarize,
Nous
can
passons
we use Google search images and videos from YouTube to not have any problems with copyrights?
Donc, il y a deux questions qui sont écrites en vietnamien. Je
So
me permets de faire la traduction en français. Une question de monsieur ou madame Lê Thương sur les,
from Miss Layton,
dans le choix des contenus.
the professor have a lot of problem.
Avec le numérique. Quelles sont les difficultés les
You
plus
know, digital transformation is very important right now. So what about the professor's university? How have you transformed your university to go from classical teaching to digital teaching? How long does it take?
Comment vous avez préparé
And
pour développer et pour mettre en place la transformation
can you also share your most difficult
traditionnelle
challenges
en enseignement
when we're choosing the content to teach
bien de temps.
that would be compatible with digital education? So those are two questions I would like to ask you.
Je vais répondre à ces deux questions.
I would like to reply to these questions.
Sur la difficulté des
First,
évoqué, j'ai pas parfaitement répondu tout à l'heure non plus.
I first talk about the difficulties of teaching.
Je suis enseignant.
I'm also a teacher, and like everyone, we are always under pressure.
Ils ont les étudiants chaque semaine.
We have students each week.
Une charge académique plus
We
ou moins.
have, you know, a very heavy workload, and the difficulty is to work in the time that is given, you know, not the time that we need for the topic.
Le temps que j'ai, c'est j'ai 3
The
heures.
time that I have is I have 33 hours to put online my resources, but the time I need is actually three days, because if I want the students to understand all the content, then it's is not the same, exactly the same science that we have to do. So that is the first difficulty. It's not have enough time to transforming the resources so that these resources are, and I'm going to say it a bit brutally, that they are sufficiently ready for the digital media.
Suivre ces cours de manière
So
asynchrone.
that the students can follow this content in a asynchronous way.
Connaissance puisse être appropriée.
So if you want to have it's very difficult for the teacher is to have to make the science, the content. When you're a teacher, you have your slides in front of you
Il faudra dire aux étudiants.
that you just have to remember what to say to the students. And each time you say and you mention the things is how you feel, but that sometimes you will tell more jokes or you will talk about your personal stories depending on the mood of the class. And another difficulty for the teacher is they don't understand the cognitive challenges.
Fonctionnement de l'esprit humain.
In terms of how the human spirit works. Of course, they know their own content, they know their own field, but they don't know how a young adult is thinking when he's, learning the materials. So that is something that we have to think about. In your second question, how do you prepare the university to go from classical education to digital education? There's no answer. There's no information about how long it takes. It could take decades. And after that, we're going to see very well that there's a lot of examples that I have just mentioned. Just imagine you have a training program that is given on site, and it's going to increase its visibility to give access to this training program. And you're gonna do a hybrid training or distance training, right? That is something that all of us might think about doing that. So how do we do? We get everyone together and we tell each of the teachers in what you're teaching right now, what requires to be together, and what is possible to be learned with students alone. So they start with that. Is to make a choice between what the students can read and learn alone and what the students cannot learn together. And in the end, we come to a distinction between the kind of different kinds of works. In your Asia Pacific University, in the main course we have two types of teaching. One is a teacher who is working in a Master of Works course, and in another method, which is the students have to work alone. In one method, the teacher has 10, 15, 20 years of experience, and the teacher will tell the students these are the most important things that you need to learn. And there are things that the students must find out, must experience themselves in an intellectual way, in a psychological way. And what is I've seen in the chat, there's a lot of questions on medicine. and you're gonna have this, in on distance learning and on-site learning. We need to convert it to something that could be given remotely. So this is what I'm looking in my university. We have a lot of resources, and nowadays, and all of the professors in my university put all their work on a platform so that the students who cannot come to the class, they must go directly in the folder and copy the content. And before, we used to do this with paper. Hybrid is different, and distance learning is completely different. And I'm gonna wait to answer the other question.
Mon ami Tang Ba Hoàng là nous avons été
And my friend over here,
à distance à l'université de Strasbourg.
my friend Tat Ba Hoàng has worked and has been to University of Strasbourg for some time, and we can know that it takes a lot of time. We cannot go to distance learning 100%. A very, very short. So can you? And the next question is, can you talk about classic learning and going to the digital? What kind of instrumental conflict do you have? And it's kind of the response that I have given in my first question.
Une question ensuite. Voilà. Une question de.
Next question is Lee Strong from Cambodia.
Des disciplines des sciences humaines.
I think that the human sciences can also use digital.
Discipline.
The question from Sinron SOK. I think that the digital can be used for the education in disciplines of human sciences, for example, language. But can you think that it's possible to replace entirely the teaching, the classical treating about the digital in other, for example, medicine or the professional training? I think that there's a lot of potential in the future for these. I think that in our generation and in the future part of the 21st century, I think it's not a question of what discipline. If we come back to the content, representation, and manipulation of content with the technical platform, we can see that medicine, health, or paramedical industries, it's exactly the same like the others. We have a written representation, which is from the experiences of the professionals. And in the medical learning field, which is, we do the same in English, French, English. And in a professional situation, in the last 3 years, we have a lot of situations. We have some cases you can learn. All of the training today contain, it's made up of 6 months of internship. So what you learn from university must be proved into practice in a professional setting. In in a workplace that is directed by the training. When you talk about medicine or health, I think there's a lot of things that you can do with digital. All of everything that is learning about the anatomy of the human body, or all the accumulation of the knowledge about the human body, all of that, or I think that can be learned by digital, by 3D representation. Imagine that you wanted to teach the different parts of. I just saw that recently, actually. One request for support for a lab to transform the digital resources to interactive resources, to make them even easier to use. So it is the production organ of the human body, masculine or feminine. I think you have that in your school also. You have different layers of the body. You can take out the skin, you go to the different body organs, and then finally go to the skeleton. So this, I think these kind of methods exist everywhere in the world. And now you can do that digitally. You have a human body. You click and you open the body. You take out the skin. You click and you take out the different bodies, etc. So that is a representation that is very, very basic. The work that I just mentioned is about how to manipulate this object in 3D and how to create quizzes. How can you treat pathologies with the human systems to improve the anatomies.
Série de questions.
Merci. Il nous reste 20 minutes.
We just have 20 minutes.
Il nous reste, je crois, dans le chat, 2 séries de questions.
We have 2 questions left.
Une série de 2 questions qui concernent le budget.
2 questions, which is
S'il y a des contraintes budgétaires, qu'est-ce qu'on fait?
if there's budget constraints, how can you develop instruments in virtual classes, digital tools? Second question is how can democratize the digital with the minimum course?
Un coût minimum. Un coût minimum. C'est des questions extrêmement sensibles.
It's a very sensitive question. The digital tools will, you can see that we have to create, we need to recover. I'm going to give you some example from e-learning industry in France. We have a lot of providers to have the applications that are made for professionals, and I'm going to talk about the works. It costs something like 50,000 euros to have an application to reply to some precise needs. I think that is like a salary of one French person in a year. So if the number of people and the time that is needed to follow this training is not of the order of 50,000 euros, I think it's very low. And if you cannot pay that much, they will start to lose money if they don't get this money. So you need to take 1 or 2 days of work for a teacher research, and they can teach students for maybe some hundreds of students. So that is, they need to have that kind of revenue to compensate for the cost to do the course. So if an institution wants to promote the numeric resources, digital resources that are not PDF, just PDF files that the teachers or the trainers already have, they must take some time. They want to turn this into a digital setting. So in Strasbourg University, Dai has mentioned that there's a lot of courses that are completely online. So we have paid the professors based on the rights of author. So the professor who have created the materials for these online courses, and they have been remunerated based on the usage of these materials. So if the resources are used more and more, they will be paid more and more. So it's a little bit like the artist when they finish the work, and this work is going to being used in the public. So it is an economic choice, and that is being replied to a lot of the history in the last years. And if it works, that means you can use it for the future. If it doesn't work, then that's too bad. So the second question, how can we democratize? I think that I almost want to tell you that it's a global problem. We are going to say that for the benefits of the industry of information technology, in the last 40 years, it's going to cost thousands of dollars for a computer. In the 1995 or in 2005, it's the same price. You will have a computer that has a very good technical specs. Does the machine that you buy worth $1,000? No, I would say not. But we're still selling it at $1,000. So you have to add new functions that are not necessarily useful to get to that price. We have webcam, we have maps, we have the solid state disk that replace the hard disks. So we have a lot of improvements. So that they are introduced in a lot of the content that we can. Is everyone ready to pay $1,000 for one machine, for one laptop? I think that for $300 is enough. I think the industrials, they have all agreed to have this price, and then after they negotiate for a price a bit more. But there's there's a kind of like a negotiation between the different actors, an agreement. think that in Vietnam, I don't know what is the story in the neighboring countries, but I think
plus un pays produit
the
de richesse.
country like Vietnam, if you produce more and more resources, the people will benefit a lot more, and they can gain individually more technical system or technical machine. So I think most of your Vietnamese citizens have a smartphone. Maybe not all people have it, but there's a lot of programs of to share this kind of resources, these machines. I heard about these programs in Mali, where it's a northern country that supports the to help to equip the southern countries with computers, with tablets of around $500. So these are the tablets that were acquired by the northern country and exported towards the southern countries. And this is some of my answer towards the question with the democratization. But of course, not everyone is living for $100 per day. But if that was the case, then the computers would be more expensive.
Dernière série de questions, il nous reste 10
Last
minutes.
question, we just have 10 minutes, 4 parts.
Avoir votre avis de partage sur premier point, la
The first
sélection
point is
des technologies de soutien pour
the selection of the resources to teach, especially the interactive resources.
Deuxième point.
Secondly is how to build open resources or how to choose high quality resources that the universities can share.
Ou plusieurs universités membres de l'AEF. Troisième point.
The third point,
Scénario pédagogique.
so what are the typical pedagogical scenarios for blended learning? And lastly, what are the good ways to check for these kind of technologies?
Quelles sont les formes d'évaluation des activités d'apprentissage en ligne, numérique, avec le numérique?
Ok. Alors,
so on the technology of the support, I cannot reply because I'm not a computer technician. It's what I say. We will stop here, and I would just say a little bit of what I feel. I will reply to the last 3 questions. The open resources, and it is question of the environment that we use these resources. There's a phenomena today with the big programs in the world to collect a big depository of open resources that are led by the big universities over the world. And it's also suggested and supported by UNICEF. It's gonna be a long time. Why is it free? Because it is based on the principle that these kind of products it must not be a product. When you learn somebody when you give a product to somebody, you lose it, but when you teach somebody, you still keep the knowledge. So that is the principle behind which they want to give this kind of free principle. Of course, you need to pay the teacher a little bit, and that is also a debate that is national and local level of discussion. So an additional object must be free after the author has been remunerated in a sufficient way. So I have a lot of examples like that. So what kind of systems behind these free resources? There's a lot of them. I have worked with there's something that is known as PopLab I've heard of, which is the competitor with Bertree, a competing app. So there's a lot of paying environments that is acquired by the governments that allows you to collect the resources and to prepare the courses and to share it, to give the asset to the students. I don't think that exists on the university education level, but I think that professors on this university level don't communicate too much on their materials. I think the secondary education, they can share a bit more. I would like to. You asked us about what is the typical scenario for blended learning. I don't think there is one particular blended learning. Sorry. I think everyone is a specialist in the course they teach. So in languages, there is no scenario particular for to learn a language, a European language, a language that is non-European with a Cyrillic or Latin or Arabic alphabet. So each of these languages or these courses have different ways to represent, and it depends on the culture of the speaker, and it also depends on the different cultures of the languages that you are learning. And it is the same thing with the digital resources. In the last question, for checks, I think, and confirmation and verification, I think it's very sensitive. I think to check the results of the students over the distance learning, I think it's not that they, because the student have paid for the materials, that they can take the exam or someone else can take it on their behalf. So there's a lot of courses or competitions, even in France, where we still put students together and we monitor them and we, make them look like they're in a prison. So, right now in area of Ile-de-France, it's about 35 Celsius, and we are doing some tests right now this morning for some candidates. So we are in middle of the pandemic. Today is the release of the rule to wear masks over in public spaces. So we make the students come to write, to be evaluated. And you can imagine that there's a lot of digital assistants where
on peut faire une épreuve
you can do tests
on n'a pas le temps d'aller chercher des informations sur
that is very, very dense,
on
that
va
you have
envoyer
no
des
time to
logiciels
go and check
quand les
materials.
réponses ne sont pas
And we have a lot of programs that,
sur internet.
the responses cannot be copied or pasted. We have a lot of systems that give you penalties if you do some, random responses. And we have other checks. And if it's not you, then the program will see very, very, very quick. So there's a lot of evaluations you can do with digital tools, and you can control indirectly that the cheating behavior is reduced to the minimum. And again, the student who is having this, this little papers to remembering of things in the exam, and he puts it in his pants or his pocket of his shirts. And the student has a lot of efforts to do this, and he is trying to remember things that he wants to remember in the exam. So
Sur l'évaluation, nous avons
thank you very much for your replies. We have
voilà. J'espère. Non, c'est le même. Voilà, mais on a fait un webinaire avec plus de détails sur les méthodes d'évaluation.
We will have a webinar on the method of evaluation. So we have arrived at the ending time. And for the questions that is talking about the tools for the production of digital resources, we have a lot of training courses that are going to help you with that. So I think just the last minute for a question.
De nombreux acteurs de cinéma muet qui ont perdu leur carrière au moment d'arrivée du cinéma.
A lot of the actors and actresses who've lost their jobs when we pass from mute cinema to cinema with sound. So do we see the same thing with the current situation? I think it's gonna be like it's gonna be worse because we are not in the industry with commercial situation. So thank you very much for response, and we hope that the digital changes will not change and replace your career. And we have more than 200 people joining this course. Thank you very much for your participation and your support and your patience. It's very interesting. So,
afin que nos équipes puissent prendre de belles photos.
So we can take a photo together. Please turn on your camera.
Cette séance aujourd'hui, nous allons découper en deux parties, présentation et questions.
We will cut the presentation into two parts and we will paste again.
Voilà. Caméra, s'il vous plaît.
Voilà.
On ne voit pas toutes les caméras là.
Je profite de ces derniers instants pour te remercier, Dai, et pour vous saluer tous, chers collègues lointains. Je vous remercie d'être là, tous ensemble. C'est toujours un grand plaisir pour moi de parler de ce que je fais. J'espère que nous aurons l'occasion peut-être de recroiser nos points de vue. Et je vous souhaite le meilleur possible dans cette période difficile qui nous contraint. J'espère que vous n'avez pas eu à souffrir de la Covid-19, que vous n'avez pas perdu de proches.
Thank you, Mister.
Quand même presque 4 millions de personnes dans le monde qui sont mortes.
Oui.
Et donc, j'espère que
Thank
les
you
personnes qui
very
vous sont
much
chères
for your
n'en font pas
practical
partie.
answers.
Thank you to
Merci,
you all.
merci. Merci beaucoup.
Chào thầy Đại.
Yeah, au revoir.
Merci.
Lâu rồi mới được gặp lại thầy Đại.